I'm very passionate about our program. I sincerely believe that it is possible for this continent to claim this century from China and make it an African century. It is possible. We must just be more disciplined and make sure that we set this as our objective. I'm aware of the challenges, but I'm mainly encouraged by the opportunities. I think the opportunities are just overwhelming. One is looking for opportunities, he or she must come to Africa. You know, in 2000, I believe that this publication or book by the World Bank entitled Can Africa Claim the 21st Century was one of the most comprehensive documents, I would say, on exactly what had gone wrong in Africa in the 70s and the 80s, and what were the major challenges in the 1990s that need to be addressed for Africa to take a new direction. They dealt comprehensively with those challenges, and in my view, they also dealt honestly with the bad policies and bad governance by African leaders, and also some unwise policies and practices by the international institutions, including the World Bank and the IMF. The experience in the 80s in particular, the 1980s, it was really a lost decade by this continent. If you look back, the military regimes in the continent, the corruption, the Maputos, the dictators in Nigeria and so on, it was just a mess in the continent. And the human rights, what was happening to human rights, and we had refugees, more refugees in this continent than anywhere else in the world. And the election, most countries had stopped calling elections. The major things, developments that took place in the 90s that really changed the environment for this continent at a global level, and also impacted on how we see ourselves as Africans and how leadership is exercised. This question of the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, I think we all know that that was an epoch-changing event. And also another event of equal proportions was acceleration of globalization at the time. In a globalized economy, if you don't have a competitive, your country is not competitive in terms of skills, in terms of its policies and so on, you're just left behind. If you're behind, the gap just opens. Africans were being shortchanged left and right. And interest rates were high where we had to borrow, and it was just a mess. We ended up with huge debts, and really that unfortunate situation resulted into African governments being weak because they had no money. They were weak, they had no money, and they had no competitiveness to export, to earn foreign exchange. So the other point that I'm just making, that while those things Africans were grappling with this experience of theirs and how they are going to move forward, there are also very interesting trends internationally. I think the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals by the United Nations, negotiations leading to that, sensitize everybody to poverty, to human rights, to this common agenda for a better world. And then what really happened then, what is real experience during the first 8 years of the 21st century? Now here, I'm going to give you figures at a global level, African level, deliberately. How this is experienced by African people at the ground, on the grassroots level, I'll deal with that later. But I'm just saying that at a global level, these are some of the good and some of the challenges that really Africa faced, but predominantly good, actually. In the first 8 years, one was a benign environment, global economic environment, resulting in improved prices for Africa's exports, mainly oil, gas, and so on. That really enabled African countries to recover from indebtedness and actually be able to earn meaningful foreign exchange. We have about 6.7 billion people in the world, and it is said that the population of the continent, including our Arab friends in the north, has reached 1 billion this year. So we're talking of this African population being what, 14, 15% of the world population, contributing less than 3%. Even if you express this thing in terms of the 57 trillion GDP of the world, you say, what is the GDP of Africa? Possibly it's about 1.3 trillion or something like that. And then you'll end up minuscule figures. So what I'm saying is that it's positive, it's growing, but it's minuscule if you compare that. It's an opportunity rather than lament it. Say that this continent is beginning to move in the positive direction, it's starting at a low level, it can really move fast. And then foreign direct investments also improved very significantly. These are positive developments. And then Africa's total external debt also decreased significantly. Remember, one of the big things that really, was really a clear indication of the weakness of the African country was the level of indebtedness. So now, suddenly, indebtedness of African countries is much lower than those of the developed countries. So Africa's achieved impressive GDP growth. Again, this is when I was in Nepal, this is what we used to, to boast about. We started in 2001, 2002, counting every year how many African countries have achieved 5%. I would say it's not true that African countries are growing at lower rates than Europe or America. Look at those 5 countries. And again, would highlight the fact that it's not only oil-producing countries that are doing well. The side that is really not really satisfactory, and for me is of great concern, is human development area. We are not doing really good on human development, and this is a big challenge. Life expectancy in Africa has come down over the years, HIV/AIDS and other reasons, but really, if you compare that, it's lower than anywhere else in the world. On HIV/AIDS, it was bad, but in a number of countries it has improved. Should I say except us? We're still talking 18% in South Africa on this, but a number of African countries are doing the right things, and really the levels of infection have stabilized. In this era of high technology and everything, to have over 1,000 women dying giving birth is totally irresponsible, shocking. Poverty continues to escalate in Africa in absolute numbers. We were 277 million in 1990, 388 in 2005. In percentage terms, slight improvements, but there's still 51% of Africans live on less than $1.25 a day. So possibly I'm saying this is the picture at a macro level. It's for you to conclude whether we're making progress or becoming an emerging power or not. The Africa's population has reached 1 billion in 2009, and 70% of those people are young. It could be dynamite, it could be great opportunity. It could be cause for instability, it could be wonderful opportunities to sell them TVs, to sell them cell phones, to sell them all the good things in life, all the brands that the young people like. So it could be something very good. So I'm saying this is most exciting. The young people are better educated, are optimistic about their future and of the continent. They're educated, they need education, health, and so on. Those are the things that they really need. In Africa, this segment of people, he says about 350 and 500 million people, of course, in the continent, that really are serious consumers, is the people that Edgar's, that Woolworths and others are chasing in the continent in terms of consumer goods. The cell phone companies, the banks are chasing these 350 to 500 people in the continent that have got a spending power. So what I'm saying, that's the continent. Those are the opportunities. That's how things are happening on the ground. There are thousands of Eritreans, Rwandans, and people from all over the continent who are students here. What's going to happen when they leave? They are going to graduate here, make friends, retain their families, their connections, and start business there and link them with businesses in their countries. That thing is going to drive itself, does not need a politician. The pressure on politicians to do away with all these obstacles that make trade and flow of people and goods, there's going to be much pressure from the people for those things to change. I just hope South African universities, other universities in the continent can continue to open their doors and make it easier for people to move around in the continent. Because if we do that, this lack of trust between governments will be undermined by increasing trust among individual Africans moving around, learning to trust each other at school, at university, and also when in the real world of business when they're in business. One of the requirements for Africa to be attractive to investors, for Africa to sustain better levels of growth, is reducing the cost of doing business in Africa. In terms of challenges, these are the major challenges. I will just leave them with you. Challenges, health, education, as I've said, human development. We need to deal with the question of the infrastructure, of the banking system in the country, financial services. And this issue of diversification of production in Africa, it will take us a lot of time to talk about that, because it links up to the WTO, our participation in the WTO process. Countries that have only less than 20% participation in the formal sector cannot be subject to the same rules as countries where 99% of the people are in the formal sector. Space must be created for countries to move from where they are to an extent where, when you talk unemployment, we're talking about people who don't have employment in the formal sector. It's not correct, it's not fair when you talk employed people in Africa to include the people in the informal sector. One of the challenges that we're faced with as African governments, as African people, is efficient utilization of resources to make sure that they are managed in such a way that we obtain our goals, outcomes effectively, efficient utilization of resources. One of the reasons we're not achieving that, we seem to waste resources, has to do with corruption of all kinds. We've seen corruption, the big ticket corruption here is arms deal, as an example. But the more incipient and more destructive corruption is by service providers at the front line. It's when you're a teacher, you're a nurse, you're a doctor, we're employed to work from 8 to 4:30 in the afternoon, you only, say, 21 days a month. You only work 10 days. The other days you find reason, either you claim to be sick or for some reason you don't come to work. That's corruption. That's the worst form of corruption that is really undermining service delivery in this country. The other form is that you come to work, but you're supposed to be doing work, but you spend most of the time chatting to other people. You're a teacher, you're a doctor, you're a nurse. Most of the time you're not productive. So the effort, the exertion of effort is far the standard that is required. The World Bank has found that this is one of the devastating things in Africa. That's why service delivery is low. This research has been done. It's happening all over the world. But for us as Africa, because we're behind other countries, it's hurting. We are not doing enough in this, in changing the mindset. But I'm just saying that I've tried to say to you, the continent is well poised in terms of opportunities, and our young people are enthusiastic and all that. And investors are responding, but we are not going to get the best benefit because of these things. It's a great continent, great people, great opportunities, but also great challenges. The challenges can be addressed. It's up to us. Just a little bit of discipline, little bit of responsibility, and really we will be there. and this century will be the African century.
Thank you very much.